we're going to break down all the different components of what it takes to manage your family's wealth into future generations. So let's get into it. The first of those is going to be actually getting the next generation involved before it's time. I see so many families and have discussions with people that, they stipulate things within their will or their trust where there's going to come a day when those assets get passed on to their kids and they're going to come into the fold and help manage, the investments or the business or the real estate, whatever that might be. But if they really don't have the skills and expertise to do that, do you think they're really going to do that well? And most times that's not the case. I had one just the other day, two brothers, they didn't do some of the things that I'm going to discuss here. And now they're at odds fighting over the commercial properties that their father left them. It's just not a good situation. And those kids were even involved in the business beforehand. But now, because there wasn't alignment in the goal and the vision, which is what we're about to talk about next, they're at risk of tearing down everything that their parents built. So you want to make sure that the kids are involved. You want to bring them to the office. You want to involve them in the business. They need to know what they're going to be managing and what they're going to be dealing with, and have the skills and expertise when it comes time to actually step into that role, and so that you can transition away. And so next, just like I discussed there, you're going to have an alignment of interest across the family. What we do in our family office when we structure things is we put together governance documents, one of those being a family constitution. And you're going to have your mission statement, your core values, your principles. All those are going to be outlined in that document so that the family is all on the same page. And that way, when you do pass the baton, they know what the overall goal of the family is, and there's not bickering back and forth. Now, I will say that you do want healthy competition, which is another component of this, in the mix, right? So as you're setting up that criteria for the next person to step into that role, you want to put incentives in place, and you might have multiple heirs that could take that role. And you're ultimately going to have to make that decision on who you're going to pass this on to. And maybe it is, you've got two sons that are going to run it hand in hand, but you're going to want to make sure that when your time comes to meet your maker, they are well prepared and they both understand their roles in running that business, managing that capital, whatever the family has for assets. You want to make sure that they're in alignment for that. And that becomes even more important as the family grows into future generations. And we'll get into, how you can kind of mitigate that and put that together in a later section here. So the other component that I want to go back to is when you do transition that role, we're all going to have that time, right? There's going to come a day where maybe you're in your 50s, maybe it's in your 70s, that you kind of want to step back from what you have been doing with your family and the business or the investments or the real estate. And you're going to want some more time to spend with the grandchildren. You're going to want to, take all those vacations, and you may not want the whole day-to-day grind that you've had to put up with in your 20s, 30s, 40s, and again, sometimes longer. Some people live for that, right? More power to you. But at the end of the day, there's going to come a point where you want to pass the baton to the next generation. And in doing that, I've seen people falter. Maybe it's because you're scared that the children aren't prepared yet. They haven't shown, all the things that you had outlined in the documentation that would allow them to step into that role. But at some point, you're going to have to be okay with that. And you're going to have confidence in them. And when you make that transition, it needs to be smooth. I've seen other situations where it drug out for years as the parents still wanted to stay in and take control and remain in control of the business and make big decisions. But they were at odds with where the child wanted to take the business. And it was actually in the detriment to the business because the employees didn't know who to go to with the problems. They didn't know who they needed to communicate with. And some people even left because of those things. So it needs to be, maybe 6 months to a year max, ideally even faster than that. When you do make the transition from being the leader, the patriarch, the matriarch that established the wealth, and you're handing the baton down to the next generation. And not to say that you don't have some controls, right? So maybe you still sit on the board, you just operate in a lesser capacity, and you don't want to necessarily let your ego, because we all have one, get in the way of what's going to be for the betterment of the family. So oftentimes the next generation sees things that you might not, and vice versa, So it's hard to navigate these waters, but that's why we're having this discussion. So next I want to get into let's say somebody wants to marry into the business. I think that it can be done in a way that's not intrusive, and it can be outlined, right? Again, so when we put this documentation together, you can set forth some stipulations on what the criteria that child needs to meet with their spouse. And that's going to be different across a lot of different families for different reasons. But at least if you specified that and set forth some of your expectations and communicated with the child or the next generation that is, looking for that spouse and going to bring them into the fold family, then they're prepared for some of the arguments that you might have or opposition that you might have when they're doing so. And so, again, touchy subject, but this is important, especially when managing the family's wealth long term. The spouses that the next generation chooses are going to have an impact on how that money is spent. Some of the long-term goals of the family, those need to be communicated up front when making that selection and even courting, the spouse or future potential spouse. All those values, principles, things that are in the Constitution, those need to be in alignment with their interests as well. Some of those might be philanthropic, they might be business interest. Again, if they've got a background in real estate or some of the other investments that the family often participates in, that can play a role as well. And as the family grows, this is the other thing I had mentioned earlier. Let's say you get 3, 4, 5 generations in. There's a lot of family offices, the Rockefellers, the DuPonts, some of the iconic American names that people know. Cargill's, similar. They're 5, 6, 7 generations deep, and they still maintain their wealth over that time span. And the way that they've done that is they have annual family meetings. Whether that's on a quarter or annual basis, they have a board of family members that help make decisions, that are involved in all of the businesses that are underneath the family office. And, obviously there's going to be oppositions from time to time. People are going to have difference in opinion and ideas. But if you're able to come together on a frequent basis and have those discussions and keep family members involved and engaged, and again, remind them of the core values, principles, and mission of the family, they're going to be able to judge those against their own ideology and then try to come to a conclusion or concession that allows everybody to work toward a common goal. And if you're doing that, then the wealth will last a long time. It can transcend multiple generations. We've all seen, heard the expression, the first generation makes it, the second generation maintains it, and then it's lost by the third generation. If you don't have a lot of what we discussed here written down, established for the family to refer back to, you haven't built these habits, you're not meeting on an annual basis, you're not involved in the partner selection, if you're dragging out the transition, like we talked about, there could be tensions. There's just a lot of pitfalls that I've seen families go through and experienced in my time in family office space that I want to make sure that, others that are stepping into this area and establishing a family office don't have to deal with. So here's the deal. It's not just about building wealth. It's about building up emotional wealth and relationships too. When the patriarch or the matriarch step down, somebody's got to step up. And when they're running a business and a family at the same time, those roles are vital to the family and its continued success. During times of transition, emotions can run high, and having someone that can help mitigate that with the family is important. So you might consider having that on board. And so that's going to be it, folks. Managing family wealth isn't just about money. It's about relationships, values, and a shared journey.